What about it, YouTube? All right, this one is for born again Barbarian. And he's another one of these guys who mostly gets it right. He's hip to the Noahide laws, but yet he thinks that the Jews need to go back to Israel and we need to help them get back there for prophecy. And he thinks not voting is the way. And I get it, not having confidence. If you could express that no confidence in the system and that the system would be shocked by that, I would say do it. If I thought you saying I have no confidence in any of this by not voting, I'd say don't vote. And perhaps that would reflect in some kind of way, but I don't think so. I think that botnet and their stuff in the ballots and whatever else. I mean, I try to tell them in the comments. I said you could have record low turnout to the voting, and at the same time have record votes cast for candidates because it's all fake and gay. All right, but that doesn't mean that you don't try. That doesn't mean that you sit on your hands. I don't like that. Okay, especially in local stuff. I think in local stuff you have to try to still push your values, for lack of better words at the moment. But anyway, born again barbarian. All right. So he's got a video about the King James and versus the Geneva, and he's all ooh ooh ooh, and the king wanted this and ooh ooh, and he's a King James guy. But you know, there's a lot of different ways to make a casserole, and so here would be what I have to say about it because this information that I found years ago, I've not been able to find again. I don't know what's happened, but it seems like they've scrubbed the internet of all kinds of good stuff that I used to be able to research and find information on. Here's the deal. All right. Wycliffe was the first guy in Old English to try to do a translation into English. All right. And I don't remember him getting run around and tried to be, like butchered out or anything by anybody per se. But maybe it was just because it was like the late 13, early, whatever, how you do it. But 13 something odd, 1380s or something. I mean, it was early, right? Well, by the time you get to the early 1500s, the climate is changing. There's this there's this weakness happening in the Catholic Church that's maintained control of Europe, right? At least they've maintained the religious control of Europe, and they've been right hand to the monarchs of Europe, right? So now they're being challenged. They get challenged by Luther. They get challenged by King Henry. King Henry schisms off with the Church of England, and Luther schisms off. And at the same time, you've got the converso Ignatius Loyola, who convinces the Pope that what they need is a fifth colony, a clandestine sort of an organization that can battle up against what would have been at the time the Rosicrucians, who were again ex conversos back in the day of the Crusades, who were butchered out back in the day, ran off to Scotland and became Rosicrucians, but now they're sort of on a different tip, right? So you've got this Rosicrucian order going on, and you've got this would be in the 1500s. You got moving along, you got Tyndall. Okay, so 1500s, you got Tyndall, and then he gets butchered out by the Catholic Church, trying to translate the Bible, and for the king, or well, I don't know, he wasn't necessarily doing it for the king, but the king needed to use it, and I can't think, I think it was Garfield or somebody came in and finished up a couple of books that Tyndall didn't get to. And they came up with the Bishop's Bible, which was their first attempt at having an English written Bible for the Anglicans, which the Catholic Church didn't want. Whatever, different argument, different time, whatever. But the Catholic Church was against anybody doing that. They didn't want somebody just doing that. So they weren't happy. Then they upgraded it to the Great Bible, because it was so big, a Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible. I don't know. So they had a couple of Bibles that they worked with for a time, right? King Henry. Then you had his son that was like young, and Edward, I think, took over for a bit, and then it was Bloody Mary switched it back to being Catholic, and then it switched back to Elizabeth. Okay, so when you get to Elizabeth, okay, things get interesting, right? Because she had two illegitimate children, and one of them was Sir Francis Bacon. Okay, so he was right there in the court, or right there, I mean, in the palace, right there in the. He knew it all, right? He was privy to it all. He was also sent off to Europe and educated all across Europe, knew five or whatever languages, met all these other literaries and ciphers and poets and the rest of it out there along the way. And then Elizabeth, his mom, has John Dee, the head dude of the Rosicrucians, also kind of like a warlock dude, like a, I don't know, he's into magic and stuff. He wrote Enochian magic. And so definitely esoteric. He's also kind of supposedly like the first 007, like this spy for the Queen and the rest of it. So he's this over the top character, right? But he's famous for saying that uh, England is not going to be able to compete with Spain and France. They're not going to be a global power. They're not going to be a colonial power if they don't have a refined language. And at the time, during the 1500s, now we'd moved from the Old English of Wycliffe's Bible to Middle English, okay? But there was not a refined language. And so this was Francis Dee's idea, was that England needed a refined language. So Sir Francis Bacon, being educated all across Europe, also comes back. He decides that Athena and Apollo are his two favorite mythological characters. Athena wears a mask, all right, and she shakes her spear at ignorance, okay? And Athena wears a mask, meaning that she's not trying to necessarily take all the credit and be famous and renowned or recognized, but secretly she'll have her power and her influence take over. Okay, so that's kind of like how he tries to go about things. That's why you don't hear much about Sir Francis Bacon necessarily. Well, so Sir Francis Bacon takes it upon himself. He gathers 47 dudes. He calls the 47 dudes the Knights of the Helmet. And the Knights of the Helmet and Sir Francis Bacon begin to form a modern English language. Now, if you're going to do that, how do you introduce it? How do you make it happen? I mean, three guys can sit in their room and make up some words and say, okay, this is, whatever. You know, it, three guys can sit in a room and play D&D and pretend it's real. But, or 47 guys, and Francis Bacon can do it. But what makes it real? They have to introduce it some way. So, how they introduced it was, again, Athena shakes her spear at ignorance. They introduced the Shakespeare plays. Now, some nobody Shakespeare could have had no idea of how the inner workings and mechanics of the palace and the courts worked, right, in England. But somehow in the plays, that is part of it. So, this tells you, it's proof that some nobody Shakespeare character is not the dude. That's just a patsy. That's just a front man. That's just something to be confused by. It was a very constructed and well thought out plan coming from, right, the crown, that this modern language would be introduced. And it was introduced through the Shakespeare plays. All right. Now, the Shakespeare plays ran through the late 1500s up and into the 1600s, and encompassed the time period before and after the translation of the King James version of the Bible. So, what's important to know here is that part of this refinement of the language, okay, was translating the Bible. So, you had them gather up the Greek, the Aramaic, the Vulgate Latin, and the Hebrew, 4 different sources that they could get their hands on. And they meticulously, over almost a decade, was it 1602 to 1611? These 47 dudes and Sir Francis Bacon meticulously, at the commission, I think it was in 1603 of James, who was from the House of Stuart, not the House of Tyndall. Oh gosh. Anyway, a lot of ups and downs and what have you's going on at the time, but Sir Francis Bacon stayed right there. After the death of his mom, he even wore purple and stuff, which only was reserved for a king. So it was almost like he was the king behind the king, if you will. Like James was the Biden, the puppet, and Obama being the puppet master theory, right? That kind of thing was going on, very likely. That James was there, but it was more Sir Francis Bacon really running it. And Sir Francis Bacon, during this time period, the early years of James, he put out the King James Version of the Bible, and it is necessarily correct because it is giving you the English language at the same time. It could not be lying to you and giving you, you know what I mean? I mean, I guess you could argue that they just made up their own crap, but they're taking 4 sources to create a language at the same time. So they're having to come up with meaning and search out meaning and define meaning into new words at the same time they're giving you the Bible. So, in my view, it's necessarily correct. And that's what tells you it's necessarily correct, is it was a language that wasn't there before that Bible was created. It hadn't been completely refined, defined, and introduced until that Bible. That Bible is the introduction of that language, of modern English. All right, hopefully that made sense. God bless.